President Trump and like-minded Republicans don't like to call the war with Iran what it is, a war. They prefer silly euphemisms like excursion or skirmish. Funny. I can't remember Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ever referring to excursion fighters or skirmish fighters. Nope. He calls his charges war fighters. And what's going on with Iran? It's a war. Tens of thousands of U.S. military personnel on land and at sea have been at war since February 28th. 18 Americans have so far died in that war, and at least 450 have been wounded, though the number of wounded could be higher because of delays in Pentagon reporting and disputes over injury classifications. These are the most visible effects of war, death and injury. There are numerous other effects. Higher tempo of operation, stress on weaponry and personnel, fatigue, and isolation. These pains are especially prevalent for sailors and Marines on long sea deployments. The bigger the vessel, the greater number and intensity of stressors. Which brings us to the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln. Its crew of about 5,000 sailors and Marines deployed from San Diego November 21st. That deployment was supposed to end in May. It has been repeatedly extended with no date set for return to port. The Military Times and the Navy Times have reported cases of sailors either going overboard or attempting to do so. There are also reports of maintenance issues and food shortages. Today, Hegseth said those reports were exaggerated. Even so, word came today that the USS George Washington will relieve the Lincoln. When, though, that remains unclear. War this is. All U.S. personnel in the region know it. They are living the risks as operational pressures and demands increase. And we're going to pick it up there with our senior national security correspondent, Charlie Daggett, who's with me here at the family table. Charlie, take it from there.
Well, when we talk about a normal deployment, if we can call it a normal deployment, the Abraham Lincoln would have been deployed, she said, for about 6 months. It's now going on 9, and there's no real end to it. And one of the more concerning numbers is 240, 250 days without a port of call, where you're going to have the sailors and Marines get a bit of a break. The other thing we have to point out that this is not just at sea, this is at war. This is kinetic, as the military like to call it, right? So you're going to have jets taking off 10,000 sorties. We have that confirmed. 10,000 sorties in this recent conflict against Iran. So you're talking about a huge operational tempo. That has wear and tear on the deck of the Abraham Lincoln, more importantly on the personnel. I just got off a Zoom call with a father that sent his son to war. It's his first deployment. Now, they all know that's what you sign up for. Not necessarily that your son or daughter is going to go to war, but is going to join and serve.
You understand there's a risk.
There's a risk involved. It's a long deployment, and there are risks because the Abraham Lincoln has come under attempted attacks from drone and missile strikes, and they've been intercepted. But it's real, it's ongoing, it's exhausting for the crew. And, you know, they're doing all they can. The Navy has said they're supplying the team with everything that they need in terms of, you know, food and rations, et cetera. But families have expressed to the Navy Secretary Hung Kao last week concerns about their mental health, their mental well-being, and to make sure that they are being treated
and to try to get
way.
some idea of when this deployment is going to end.
When it's going to end, when it's going to be over. And as you said, the George Washington is on the way there. And I have to point out again that when the Abraham Lincoln set sail, it was going to the Pacific. It changed direction when it started to be needed, and again, with no end in sight.
And you've been on that vessel, have you?
I have,
Charlie?
indeed, yeah.
Describe it for us.
Okay, so I was there back in 2019, but I was at the Strait of Hormuz with rising tensions against Iran. They weren't in a conflict zone, right? It wasn't kinetic. However, those takeoffs and landings were nonstop. They were around the clock, through the night. We witnessed them ourselves. And of course, sailors and Marines would get used to those kind of quarters, but boy, is it crowded in there. It's very claustrophobic. It's cold because they want to make sure that there's no disease spread there. You're 4 bunks. It's very crowded and claustrophobic, and you're on top of one another, and there is an intensity. And again, that's reflecting a, quote, peacetime deployment, not a conflict.
And there's also some things we need to catch ourselves up on what happened at Fort Hood. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this is an Apache helicopter that crashed yesterday afternoon at Fort Hood. We spoke to the Army who run the Apache helicopter. It's a two-person helicopter, two-person crew. They confirmed that it went down around 1:35 local time. They're not exactly sure. Both the crew members were killed. They're not exactly sure what brought the Apache down. The Apache historically doesn't have that scrappy a record. As a matter of fact, an Apache was attacked or attempted attack in the Strait of Hormuz, and those crew members were safely recovered and safely rescued. So they're not exactly sure the details of what happened, but this is America's.
This was a part of a training exercise.
It was a training exercise, and this is America's premier attack helicopter. Part of that training and part of what the Apache does well is this low-level flying that may have factored into it, but at this point, we don't know whether that was a pilot error or mechanical error. An investigation's underway.
To our knowledge, has the family's been notified?
Well, we have a 24-hour period before we learn the names, and I think we're pretty much entering that window now.
They're being notified. Okay, very much. Thank you. Charlie, always a pleasure.